Dawn came slow to the hollow, rising out of the river fog as if the light itself had to be wrung from the damp. Eulalie felt it before she saw it, how the mist cooled her skin even while the furnaces from the still house breathed hot on her face. The cooper's yard wore last night's ash like a shawl, gray dust resting on every stave and hoop, soft until a finger laid a dark trail through it. She could tell from the smell if the fires had been hungry in the night. They were sated now, the char on the fresh barrels clean scorched, sweet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. Eulalie set the crow's knife against a white oak stave, easing it so the groove made a low, steady whisper like someone breathing through their teeth. The morning would carry that sound into the sycamores and along the fence to the quarters, and someone would know she was alive, working, unbroken. The yard cat threaded through her feet and the shavings, tail flicking, as if he kept a tally of things the overseer did not know. Mr. Silas Rutledge, master when he was sober, lord when he was drunk, had walked the yard the evening before like a man counting his coins by smell. He leaned into the barrels and inhaled, nose almost touching the interior, telling a story of smoke he could taste. He loved to tell stories to himself more than to any person. Eulalie learned to tuck herself small inside the corners of those stories whenever he came near. She was good at corners. She'd been living in them all her life. She drew the hoop drivers close with a toe, set the smallest hoop, and lifted the trussing rope that gathered the staves into a first shy circle. The rope thrummed as she pulled, a little song that told her when the wood would give and when it would fight. Oak had moods. Fresh split staves still carried rainwater in their memory. Old, air-cured ones gave up easier, as if they had already argued with the wind and lost. She knew all the tempers of wood, and she knew all the tempers of men. And sometimes they were not so different. The stillhouse doors creaked, steam wreathed out like a thing loosed from prayer. Jonah, the mash hand, shouldered through, shirt plastered to his chest, copper stills behind him glinting dull as coins under soot. "Mornin'," he said without looking at her, because looking was a luxury here and sometimes a danger. "Morning," she said, quiet. The word rolled in her, weighed for shape like a stave, then set aside where it would not be noticed. She worked. Hands learned to be faster than fear. The crows shaved its circle, the head went in, the hoop took its seat with a firm, convincing ring. She tapped the ring to make it true, the way young mothers tap the bottom of a baby to coax air through a new chest. She did not have a baby. She had barrels. By the time the sun shook free of the fog and lodged in the chin of the far hills, she had made 3. Briny, thin as a rail and always hungry, carried the first one like it might be a drum. He would smack it when he thought no one was listening, all rhythm and no tune. Eulalie slid a look at him, and he flushed and set it down gentler. He was still new enough to believe that wood could be taught kindness. The overseer, Mr. Crenshaw, came across the yard with his shadow, greasy and long in the morning light. In second light, men's faces showed what first light hid, crease, impatience, the nights they drank. "You," he said to Eulalie, as if names were a thing he kept in his pocket and might spend on better folk. "Rutledge wants the best of this batch up and ready after supper. He's got buyers coming out from Owensboro and says he'll put on the taste." "Yes, sir," she said, and kept her eyes on the hoop she was setting. Mr. Crenshaw liked to step on the eyes of people. It made him tall for a breath. He lingered anyway. "Heard you can smell the age on a barrel," he said. "Heard you know when it's ready. Mr. Rutledge says you got a nose on you." His mouth twisted around the compliment as if the words were bitter. Eulalie let the smallest of smiles live in her throat when no one could see it. "Oak tells on itself," she said. "Better hope it tells true," he said, and his boots went away across the yard barking at someone else. When the yard quieted again, Eulalie blew the dust from the crow's groove and let herself look into the stillhouse doorway where steam made a veil. It was cool farther in, past the bricks and sweating pipes, where Silas Rutledge kept his ledgers on a high shelf and believed no one below that shelf could see the numbers. There had been a time, 2 winters gone, when he left the book open and stepped away to laugh at something crude with a buyer. Eulalie had passed that doorway with a pail of spent mash, and her eyes had stuck on a word like a burr on a dress hem. Shipment. Her own surprise had almost undone her. The letters made a sound inside her, the way the river made a sound in a person's chest when they lay close to it at night. She had kept walking. In her mind, she looked back at the page, letting each mark settle, a row of fence posts she could count again later. Under shipment came a place and a date, and then another place under it, as if a path had been drawn in the house of numbers, and no one noticed the path had a shadow. That night, she had taken the torn leaf from the back of Aunt Zora's Bible, the one Aunt Zora said wasn't fit for the word no more because someone had spilled lard on it. She smoothed it with both hands, held her breath, and wrote the word shipment with a char stub. The letters trembled like a newborn calf's legs. She matched the tremble with patience until the legs learned ground. She wrote the date she had seen beneath it, those tall, daring numbers, and beside it the town with a long, river-slow name. Then she blew the char dust away, and the weight of what she had done lifted her ribs. Aunt Zora had taught her how letters were branches that made shade if you sat under them long enough. Taught her using the labels of tonic bottles and sacks, using a newspaper that had come with the fish, washed and saved dry. All them things talk, Aunt Zora had said, slipping the paper to her under cornbread, showing her how not to look at a thing the first time you wanted it. They talk right in the open, and the ones who keep you hungry never think to keep you from reading. They never believe you will. So Eulalie learned. Not quick, not easy, quietly. She learned when the sun went down, in the bit of light that spilled from the door of the dying hearth. She learned in the washroom where steam made the letters soft and close. She learned with the river, reading the raftman's chalk marks on peeled sycamore poles stuck in the bank, the river's ledger that told rise and fall. And every piece she gathered hooked onto another piece, and the hooking made a net. She kept the torn Bible leaf and other scraps wrapped in oiled cloth in the rafters of the cooper shed, where a rat couldn't reach and a man wouldn't look up. The better she got at letters, the more she saw how the world was penned together with them. Ledgers, labels, bills of lading. Every barrel had a chalked story on its head. Char level, fill date, mash bill, sweet corn heavy or rye bite that came sharp as nettle. She learned the marks for char. There were men up from Louisville who called it a number now, though the old Coopers still called it burn just shy of bitter. She listened and kept her own count. 3 fires on the inside made the caramel pour from the wood when the liquor lay in it. Longer than that, and the oak remembered storms instead of summer and turned sullen. In a place where her voice meant less than a hope's ring, her nose and eyes and the quiet scratching of char on paper gathered a different kind of strength. That strength turned in her like a river eddy, wanting to be a current, wanting to move something larger than one barrel at a time. Silas Rutledge's story about himself had him as a man lifted by his own will. He had bought the distillery from a widow who never slept again after her son drowned in a vat. He told that story at his own table, his laugh lapping at the rim of it like whiskey. Eulalie saw the part he left out when she cleaned his snuff from the floor and his boots from the step. The widow had sold because she could not carry the place by herself after they sold off 4 of her people. She had said hands, and meant hands you could tie. Silas Rutledge did not laugh at that part because he did not tell it. Eulalie kept the names of the sold 4 inside her tongue like seeds she meant to plant when the ground would take them. On quiet afternoons, when the white dogs slept under the sourwood tree, she would repeat them low and smooth until they salted her mouth. Names were a practice. Names sharpened her. The buyers came from Owensboro that night, just as Mr. Crenshaw said. A pair with city dust still clinging to their cuffs,
The kind of men who wore their coats like a joke they told at a funeral. They spoke quick and too much, eyes always crossing each other and then fixing on the whiskey with the sudden sincerity of drunks in church. Eulalie stood in the corner of the tasting room and watched shadows move across their faces as lamplight whispered up from the table. She poured when Mr. Rutledge nodded, bottle angled just so. He liked the show of a woman's careful wrist. He did not see the wrist that could swing a hoop driver. "Note the vanilla," he said to his guests, and to the air, and to himself. "Note the caramel. That's the char. That's a number 3 on those barrels if you're number-minded. My own coopers, my own craft." He did not look at Eulalie when he said it, which was part of his craft too.
The buyers nodded as if they had discovered vanilla in a bush out back. One of them turned his glass and asked, "What's your mash bill?" And when Mr. Rutledge answered, Eulalie repeated the numbers in her head and put them in a corner where she kept things she might need to remember later. When the buyers were full of their agreeing and the table was wet with their agreement, Mr. Rutledge said, "We'll walk through the still house. You can see what you're paying for." He spoke "your" like a man lending a horse. "Bring the lantern," he told Eulalie without looking. He liked to see his light carried. They walked past the copper swan necks that curved like living things in the half-dark, past the worm tubs and the tubs of mash, and into the far room where the old barrels slept like brown dogs in a row. Eulalie lifted the lantern so the buyer's eyes could find the chalk marks. Mr. Rutledge touched a barrel affectionately and said to the men, "You won't find better." He said to the barrel, "My good child." He was not cruel in the way a man who wanted to be remembered for his cruelties is cruel. He liked his rage tidy, folded under a napkin. If a thing needed pain, he preferred to be told afterward that it had been done well. He could turn that way only to clean the taste from his mouth. He had a voice he used for horses, dogs, whiskey, and unthinking women that made all of them go quiet the same way. Eulalie watched him speak to his barrels and wondered what it would be to make him hear a different voice rise out of the very thing he loved. Somewhere inside her an idea spun once, twice, and settled like a hoop. Later, when the buyers had been swallowed by the night again, and the tasting room looked like a room forgot by morning, Eulalie cleaned the table. She pocketed the corks that had rolled to the floor. Aunt Zora liked the smell of them by her pillow. And she wiped circles until the wood looked like it had been blessed. Mr. Rutledge stood with his back to her, staring at his own ledgers. "We're going to New Orleans with this next lot," he said to the window, not to her. "Price is right. War drums or no, gentlemen still drink." War was a word that had traveled even into mouths where words were rationed. There were men in town who said the Union was a string about to snap, men who said it like boys daring each other to jump from the rope swing into the deep water. Eulalie did not know the shape of war, only the shape of men after they had talked about it too long. New Orleans. The word hung oil-slick and bright in the lantern light. She had written it once, on her little fat Bible leaf, shaped it slow as if rubbing a coin true. New Orleans. The thought of that far city made the air in her chest widen until she could breathe all the way to her fingers. She did not move. She listened to Mr. Rutledge's breath and to the quiet of his numbers wiping themselves across his eyes. When he left, she stepped near the ledger shelf. The book sat open like a mouth after a sigh. Shipment. The line ran down from it to New Orleans in Mr. Rutledge's tidy, smug hand. A date and an amount, and the name of a riverboat she knew by the sound of its wheel. Evangeline. In the margin a note. 3 barrels reserved of reserve. He had written reserve twice, once as a thing saved, and once as a thing special. She smiled at that in the dark, where no one could see. Reserve meant the old barrels in the far room, the ones sleeping like dogs, the ones he called "my good child."
He planned to walk them to the dock road himself, under escort, show them off, maybe hum to them while they rolled. That night, back in the cooper's shed, she climbed the ladder into the rafters where the roof made a small shelter over the world. The star ached through a gap. She unwrapped the oiled cloth bundle and copied what she had seen in a careful hand that did not look like the hand of any woman who lived under a man's ledger. Isaiah had once told her, in a whisper that shook, that writing makes you more than one person at once. Isaiah could read, and he could swim farther than the current's patience, and he could talk to a man who thought he owned the very water he stood over. He moved up the green and down again with deals folded in his hat and secrets stored in the shape his shoulders made when he lifted. He was free in the way a man could be free and still have to count who was watching. She had met him at a landing when the Evangeline took on charcoal and a hogshead of pickles. He had watched her watch the chalk marks on the sycamore with the long bitten notches that meant the river had risen 7 inches since last week. "You keep numbers," he had said in a voice that sounded like cedar shaving. He had not said, "You know letters." She had not said, "I can hear them breathing." They had spoken of rain up in the hills and whether the river would shoulder its banks tonight, which was the same language as telling a person you could count and keep quiet. She copied the line about New Orleans for him now. If a man could be asked to carry a word inside his hat, it could be Isaiah. She did not yet know to what end she would use it, but she had learned that if a net was to catch anything at all, it must be cast before the fish showed themselves. Days thinned and stacked. August turned to September and the fields dry sang under the sun. The men in town kept talking their string talk, and the stillhouse kept breathing, and Eulalie kept making barrels with the unwavering patience of a mill. She gathered small things without anyone seeing the pile. A sliver of iron she wedged under one of the old room's floor planks to make it sing when you stepped there. The way Mr. Rutledge leaned too far into a barrel when he wanted to taste the angel's share rising off it. A trick with a rope she learned watching men load hogsheads onto carts, how a knot could throw its weight against a fool who thought he held it. She tried the knot in the yard behind the shed with Briney. You pull wrong and the rope comes back at you. You pull right and the rope pulls what you want. He looked at her like boys look at a door they had not seen before. "What you want?" he asked, eager to be useful. She touched his wrist so he would stop seeing the door for a moment and see his own hand. "I want you to learn how to cut a rope quick without cutting yourself," she said, and put the knife in his grip the way a mother would put a spoon in a child's. He practiced until he could split a loop with one motion and step back. She told him to keep that trick quiet until she asked for it. She practiced other things alone, how close a lantern could come to a barrel head before the fume reached for it, the slickness of spilled mash under a heel, how to set a hoop secondary pin weak so one good jolt would drop the head into the belly of the barrel like a trap door. She learned the sound of the stillhouse when it was empty and when it pretended to be. There was a hush the building made when a man was in it who did not want to be seen. She learned the hush and kept it folded inside her with the names and the numbers. Each practice felt like a bead sliding onto a line. The line grew heavier, and with the weight came the knowledge that a necklace can be a garrote when a hand is ready. She did not talk to Aunt Zora about plans. Aunt Zora kept her prayers wrapped tight in the cloth around her hair, but Eulalie did not keep all of herself alone. Letty down in the kitchen knew the way Mr. Rutledge took his coffee and the way he took his pettiness. She saw people at their hungriest, which meant she knew their truest temperature. "There's a crack in him," Letty said one morning while they were both reaching for the same towel and laughing because it was the only laugh the room would permit. "You ever see the cold that creeps into a glass set too close to the ice? That's in him. He puts his hand on people like he puts his hand on warm stone, but something inside makes him shiver.
Eulalie nodded. Men like warmth they didn't make, she said. They stand in front of fires and call it their flame. Watch your fire, Letty said softly, eyes sideways so no wall could remember it later. A spark falls where it wants. I've been teaching sparks their letters, Eulalie said, and Letty's mouth made a surprised "oh" before she hid it under a cloth and turned to the stove. It became a Sunday afternoon with haze in it, the kind that makes even crows talk like gentlemen. Isaiah came up from the river with an old hat and a new message shaped like an absence. He found Eulalie in the garden between sage and sorrow, and in the way he stood, she could read the news before he opened his mouth. I got to a small thing, he said, head bent. Small things are precise, she said, and moved so her body made the kind of shade under which men say only what matters. He told her that the Evangeline's clerk's brother owed him a favor and had let him read a scrap, just a snip torn when the clerk lit his cigar off the letter. It said Orleans, and it said Rutledge, and it said Reserve. I think he is sending 3, Isaiah said, and I think he will walk them himself. He did not say, how do you know so well the shape of what he writes that the word you wrote and the word I saw meet at the same corner? Eulalie took that corner in her hand as if it were a seam she could feel through cloth. She looked toward the still house which sat quiet in the amber of late day. I'm going to break a barrel, she said very calmly. Isaiah's eyes lifted. Break a barrel? You ever see a trapdoor? She asked. She explained the pin, the head, the way a man who loved the smell of his liquor would bend in without thinking. He calls it the angel's share when the liquor goes up. He forgets something else can come down. Isaiah watched his hands as she showed where the knife would go, where the rope would lie, how a slip could make a man's weight do the hard part for you. He was quiet a long time. You sure, he said finally, that you want the river to remember that? The river remembers everything, she said, and for the first time since the idea had set itself in her, she felt the ache of what comes after. Heat tightened her throat. I know what it will cost. I know a body floats back. I know even quiet plans make noise when they're done. But there's a crack in him, and I want to push a river through it. He nods, almost invisibly, the way a tree nods when a hummingbird lands. Then, the night it happens. He stopped, chewed the night like a tough piece of meat. There should be other eyes. She said, there will be. Letty will have him thirsty. Mr. Crenshaw will be drunk on his own shadow. Bryony will have a knife for a rope. Jonah will have the furnace door open so the light throws wrong in the room and men's feet go where they shouldn't. And you, Isaiah, she looked at him, let him feel the weight of her need and her certainty. You will be where the path meets the river, in case a barrel rolls farther than a man's body. He accepted his piece of it like a coin he would never spend. All right, but if I tell you to run, you run. I've been running in place my whole life. I'm ready to move. They set the night, 2 before the shipment date. It had to be before because after would bring too many eyes. It had to be near supper because that's when bodies go soft. It had to be a night when the river spoke loud so any noise in the still house would be swallowed up. The river obliged with rain up in the hills. Eulalie heard it in the pitch of the frogs and in the way the sycamore leaves cupped themselves like hands about to receive. Since the plan meant nothing without the practice of it, she went to the old room in the soft hour before dusk 3 days running while men were changing shifts. She chose a barrel in the middle row, 3rd from the back, one Mr. Rutledge loved like a fine story he saved for after a joke. She marked the back side where no one would see, set the secondary pin so it's seated but not proper, and tested how much jolt it would take. Less than she expected. She could tap the hoop driver once, good and mean, and the head would drop. The smell of liquor coming up from the open mouth when she tested it made her eyes sting with something like grief and something like hunger. She practiced the knot on the rope that would bracket the barrel's waist. She ran the rope across the room through a pulley Jonah found so that the pull came from a corner and not from the place where she stood. She learned the rope's speech too, the way it spoke of tension and give. She hid her work each time under as much of the world as she could pull over it. Tools slightly out of place returned just so. Dust drifted back with her breath, footprints masked by her own backward steps. On the last practice day, Mr. Crenshaw came into the room while she was in the far corner smoothing dust. He stood too close, breath sour with something sweet. "You're a quiet one," he said, as if quiet were an accusation. He put his hand on the side of the barrel she had marked. The barrel said nothing. Eulalie's skin tried to lift off her bones. "Mr. Rutledge says you got a nose on you," Mr. Crenshaw said again. Nearly fond this time, almost a mirth. "What's this one smell like?" She lifted the lantern, stepped just enough closer that his shadow moved to cover her. She bent and dipped her nose toward the bunghole and took in the angels. "Plum," she said, because the word would make him think of sweet things and make him swallow. "Smoke." She let her mouth find the wet at the corner of the word, "a little saddle." He laughed and slapped the barrel with a short, flat rhythm. "Saddle, that's a woman's way of saying it's ready to ride." "It's ready," she said. He went away to tell Mr. Rutledge a thing he would think was his own. Eulalie wiped her face with both hands and pressed her palms together hard until the bones knew each other again. The day came dressed as any day. Letty kneaded dough with the roll of her shoulders, humming low because even tunes are rationed. Aunt Zora went down to the river and stood in it up to her calves and watched the drift the way old women watch church doors. Mr. Rutledge whistled a tune he had stolen from a whistler who had made it himself in a field. Men lifted sacks and made stacks. Boys ran when no one could see. The white dog lay in the sourwood shade and dreamed of the smell of deer. Isaiah went and returned and went again, a man who looked like work when work wanted a cloak. He passed Letty a bundle wrapped in old paper. She unwrapped it to reveal a jar of coffee she had not seen since Easter, and she made it into a smell that could lead a man by the nose. Toward evening, Mr. Rutledge rode out and took the lower road a piece like he always did when he was a man who owned a horse. He came back as the sky scratched red on the horizon, and he looked pleased with something no one in the yard could afford. "After supper, I'll have that taste of the reserve. The buyers wrote and set their meeting for Friday. I'll not send anything I ain't blessed." He liked to phrase blessing as if God had found a way into his mouth. After supper, the air wore the dark like a thin shawl. Summer's dark is poor. It doesn't have weight until midnight. The river was talkative. Frogs tuned their throats. Men found the shade of the buildings to smoke without making smoke. Let it clean with a slow hand so Rutledge would be driven by his own thirst. Eulalie walked to the still house door and held it as a person might hold a heartbeat they borrowed. Mr. Crenshaw was already a drunk idea in the corner of the yard, a man trying to put his foot on a step that moved away each time he reached for it. Bryony had his rope knife in his pocket and his mouth dry with the knowledge that a knife can make a man. Jonah stood by the furnace and fed it just enough to make a strange light, not the usual even glow, but a flicker that made the room's corners shrug. "Bring me to her," Mr. Rutledge said. He touched the lantern as if the light were his dog. He walked past the copper as if he were walking past his own boys. His actual boys slept in a house where their mother did not know the names Eulalie kept safe. He went to the far room. Eulalie went before him because he liked the light to greet his loves first, and because she needed to see where the shadows fell. The room held its breath. The rope coiled where a rope should coil. The barrel in the third row, marked for angels and other things, wore its hoops like a man wears a belt without thinking whether it fits. Eulalie let the lantern rise and washed the chalk marks with their tender chalk courage. 1836, corn 72, rye 15, barley 13, number 3. Mr. Rutledge smiled at his own numbers. "Listen," he said to the buyers who were not there. He said it anyway because he liked rehearsal. He placed his palm against the wood like he might bless it. "You can hear the liquor in there, breathin' like a woman asleep." He put his face close to the bunghole and breathed in. His eyes softened and then sharpened. "Bring the thief." He meant the copper tasting tool, a slim pipe you slipped into the barrel to draw a little of the whiskey into the light. Eulalie turned. The thief hung on the far wall by the rope she had laid through the pulley. She reached for it with the kind of care that tells a knot how to behave. The rope lay slack like a sleepy snake. Mr. Rutledge, impatient man who loved to pretend patience, bent further as if he might find the very year inside that barrel with his nose. "Saddle," he murmured, and smiled at his own joke he had already been told. His hand moved to the rim. He leaned as if the barrel were an open well he could see his face in. Eulali's body felt the world narrow to him, to the hoop's pin, to the small triangular shadow under the rim where her knife would go if it had to, but it would not have to. She reached the thief. The lantern sent a sliver of light skittering along its copper. She could see Jonah in the doorway, his shoulder a silhouette against furnace glow. She could see Bryony, a gray moth of a boy with a knife in his pocket and a prayer somewhere he didn't know the words of. In that smallness, in that precise little world, she heard another step behind Mr. Rutledge, Mr. Crenshaw. He had found his feet and brought his thirst with him. He chuckled wetly, and the sound crawled into the room without permission. "You blessing the good child?" he said, jelly-mouthed. Eulali's breath went still so it could hear better. Mr. Rutledge straightened only as much as the barrel allowed and looked over his shoulder. "I am," he said, easy because he felt safe inside his own house of numbers and wood. Mr. Crenshaw, not a man trained to recognize grace when it asks for work, laughed again and clapped the top hoop so it rang a little. The sound went down Eulali's spine with a chill. She watched the pin shudder in its seat. One more slap in the head might betray her before she asked it to. She stepped quickly, smaller steps than the rope wanted, and put the thief into Mr. Rutledge's hand the way a servant gives a king a blade with the hilt faced right. He slid the thief into the bung, the barrel's side. He brought out a finger of amber and turned so the lantern could catch it. He lifted it to his nose and the world dimmed around his face to make room for the way he closed his eyes. He liked to close them because it gave him the feeling he had made the dark. "Plum," he said, slow. "Smoke. Saddle." Eulalie felt Letty's coffee drift from the open door. She felt the river press its palm against the back wall of the room. She felt the rope speak to her through the pulley. Now. A knot can tell time if you listen. "Careful," she said, soft. And anyone could think she meant the thief, or the lantern, or the word he had just tasted. Mr. Rutledge bent again in unconscious obedience to a voice that had never asked him for anything, but it always told him he was right. Eulalie's hand found the rope and pulled, not hard, not noisy, but with the certainty of a woman who had spent her life making circles hold. The rope moved, and the pulley turned, and the thief's other end nudged the hoop just where the pin sat. The pin quivered, and then leaped like a fish thrown back to water. The head dropped into the barrel's belly with a soft, killer's sound. Mr. Rutledge's weight went where his nose was. He pitched forward, hands flinging for the rim. One caught and slid. The other found only lantern light. His face went down into the open mouth of the barrel where angels had been dining all these years. The whiskey took him like a lover who planned to drown a man with kisses. Bryony moved, a gasp and then the fast, clean sound of rope cut when a boy remembers his lesson. Jonah's silhouette swelled, and then the furnace door clanged so a sheet of light went sideways across the floor like a blade. Mr. Crenshaw lunged without knowing why, hands grabbing at air as if the room had turned to water around him. Eulalie saw the rim of the barrel shiver, saw Mr. Rutledge's hand paw for the hoop like a dying fish for a reed. She saw the rope's tail whisper across the floor where it had been waiting to trip a foot. She saw Mr. Crenshaw's boot heel touch that whisper, and she saw the old floorboard with the sliver of iron sing its small, betraying note. Everything that had practiced itself inside her came to the edge of itself and asked for one more inch.
She stepped and put her palm on Mr. Rutledge's wrist and pushed, not with force, but with the weight of a life. He went deeper. The barrel rocked. The whiskey climbed his cheeks. His breath made bubbles that rose like pennies from a bent man's pocket. Outside, the river raised its voice, and in that swell of sound, men, barrel, breath, wood, fire, she heard the one thing she had not rehearsed for, a voice at the door, high, tight, with fear and something like delight braided together. "Mr. Rutledge?" It was his oldest son, the one who had his father's stride and his mother's tender mouth when he slept. He was not supposed to be there. He had been at the big house with homework he called figures, a boy of 13 about to learn a man's hunger. Eulalie's hand froze where the salt of the barrel rim bit her palm. Behind her, Mr. Crenshaw stumbled, caught himself, and reached for the lantern as if light would return him his dignity. The boy took a step into the room, and the still house took it into itself, making every other sound brief, ashamed. "Pa," he said, and leaned forward. Eulalie felt the rope in her hand like a living creature. She looked at the boy's mouth, the shape his fear made on it, the way childhood still tugged at his chin. She looked at Mr. Rutledge's wrist under her palm, the pulse of him gone frantic in the place where a man is most like a boy. She thought of names like seeds. She thought of nets. Time narrowed to the width of a hoop. She let go the rope and reached for the thief, copper slick, the lantern's light running over it like water. And then the lantern slipped in Mr. Crenshaw's hand, tilted, threw a bright, sudden stripe onto the barrel's gleaming lip. The stripe became a flare as the fume reached for fire with the eagerness of a long-denied kiss. The air took a quick breath that was not a breath. Eulalie heard Letty shout far away, heard Jonas curse chop the dark, heard the boy say "Pa" with a break that made a cut in the room you could step through if you dared. The flame licked, wicked and curious. Eulalie moved.
This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Over the lip of the barrel, Eulalie knocked the lantern from Mr. Crenshaw's loosed hand with a quick, flat slap that would have looked like clumsiness from any distance. The lamp sailed and hit the dirt of the threshold, glass spidering, flame shuddering into a smaller, sulking blue before Jonah's boot grounded dead. The fumes still licked the air with a hungry mouth, but the lick found only shadow and went thin. "Get back," Eulalie said to the boy. No name in her head for him but son, and she kept her voice steady as a board under a man's weight. He was frozen. She eased a hand to his shoulder and moved him toward the hallway, where the smell of coffee and bread could argue with the smell of whiskey and fire. His elbow was all bird bone under her palm. "Back," she breathed, and when he stepped, she put herself between him and the barrel. Mr. Rutledge's hand had gone from pawing to nothing. Bubbles, then not. The room took that fact in without ceremony, as if it had always lived here and only waited to be noticed. Mr. Crenshaw made a sound like a slice of laughter cut off by a belt. He lurched forward, but the rope tail Eulalie had spread whispered under his heel, and he stumbled to one knee, catching himself against a rack. The old iron-lipped floorboard sang a thin, bright note of alarm. Jonah cursed low through his teeth and shouldered the furnace door shut until the light was only a thin eye. "Don't." Eulalie's palm flattened over Mr. Rutledge's wrist just once more, not to push, but to meet the last of him. She did not look at his face. She looked at wood and light and shadow and at the boy's shoes where they had stopped in an old puddle print. The shape of everything mattered. "Pa?" the boy said again. It was a small word, a little drawn a well gone deep. He took a half step, and Eulalie met it with her body as if she were moving a barrel into place. No meanness, only the knowledge of weight. "Not yet," she said. "Not inside." Letty's voice from far as a porch called the boy's name, Thomas, and came quick with the quickness of water finding the lowest place. She took him up the hall, the way a woman lifts a hot pot and does not hiss. Eulalie felt the air widen just enough to let the next thing happen without cracking. Jonas' eyes asked a question she didn't want to hear out loud. Eulalie gave him the answer with her chin. He nodded and pulled the heavy bung mallet from its hook. One clean strike set the bung solid, so no more air would feed the room its hunger. The barrel went from mouth to tight-lipped, from witness to coffin. Mr. Crenshaw, kneeling, found his feet. He looked at Eulalie with a face trying on 3 suits in one breath: fear, accusation, calculation. The cut on his palm where the lantern glass bit bled along his lifeline and made a red path that confused his thinking. "What?" he started.
Eulalie didn't let him finish. She reached, took his wrist in the same practiced way she had taken Mr. Rutledge's, and turned his hand so the blood showed. "You brought a lamp into fume," she said, not loud, not soft, in the voice of a rule that existed long before men. "You know better'n that." He stared, mouth slack. A child hears a rule and obeys. A man hears it and resents that the rule knew him first. He tried again. "You did," she said, and released his wrist so the blood could go where it would. She pointed with her chin toward the door where the lamp lay in ruins. "Pick up what glass you can. Then go call the doctor if your legs remember you." He looked to Jonah for a friend. Jonah stared at the place on the floor where the light had been, as if memorizing how not to have it again. Mr. Crenshaw staggered to the door and went out, his shadow breaking apart on the lintel. Eulalie stood very still and counted. 10 for the breath to come back. 10 for the room to choose which memories it would keep. 10 for the part of her hand that had done the pushing to stop trembling. Bryony hovered, colorless as dust. She let her eyes find his and then dropped them to his pocket. He made the smallest nod. Knife gone. The rope tail had already been collected and tucked under his shirt like a rag. "Fetch me 2 wet sacks," she said. "Smother smell." He flew, a boy built for running small errands that hit like thunder. Jonah lifted the mallet again, not to strike, but to lay it on the rack where it belonged, like a man returning a borrowed word. In the hall, Letty's low voice braided with the boy's thin answers, a rope made of 2 different fibers that still held. They pulled Mr. Rutledge from the barrel only when the doctor came with his bag and Deputy Shoulders followed. By then, the room had been swept by many eyes in Eulalie's mind. She saw where the lamp would have fallen and where a sober man would have set it, and how Mr. Crenshaw's cut made a picture you could show to anyone and say, "Cause." When the deputy, Mr. Larkins, asked questions, Eulalie stayed at the edge of his circle and made sure her face had learned how to be dumb under a bright light. Mrs. Rutledge arrived with her hair half made and her mouth a long white line with no words. She took one look at the water dark on her husband's shirt front and folded inward like cloth pulled off a line. Women ran. The white dog howled once like a mistake. "Leaned in too far," Mr. Larkins said finally, crouched by the barrel like it might offer him a lesson. He rubbed his jaw. He brought flame where it had no business. He looked at the broken lamp. He looked at Mr. Crenshaw's hand, at the glass in the doorframe. He looked at Eulalie like a man checks the sky for rain he can smell but can't name. "They were tastin'," Jonah said, voice even, as if naming a thing kept it from rising. He asked for the thief. Then he leaned. Mr. Crenshaw swallowed twice before he found his story. "I came to take the smell. I brought a lamp because Because the furnace light was wrong. I didn't think. His eyes kept skittering from Eulalie to the barrel to the deputy. You could light a room with the heat of his guilt if you had the right tinder. Mr. Larkins made a note on a scrap from his pocket. You didn't, he said, dry. He stood and looked around the room as if it was trying to sell him something he almost wanted. Accident, he concluded, voice already turned for the road. Like that widow's boy 10 years back. Barrels and men. He spat into the dirt. We'll write it so, and the preacher will say his piece. Letty's hands were clean of flour now. She slipped up beside Eulalie, close enough their shoulders spoke in quiet. Thomas saw, she whispered. He saw more than anyone's boy should carry. He saw me move him away, Eulalie said, though she did not know if the boy had seen that part, or the part where she laid her palm on a man's last breath. Keep him with the women. Keep him in bread and chores. Bread and chores, Letty said, like a litany that held back a flood. They laid Mr. Rutledge out in the parlor, which had never before accepted any man lying down except in drunkenness. Women brought flowers that smelled bravely of nothing. Men brought hats to hold and look into when they didn't want to look at the body. The boy hovered like a new moon, slivered and pale, his eyes 2 small lakes out of season. Eulalie stayed where a woman of her station stays, near the door, always with a thing to fold or carry, invisible until the one needed thing happens to be herself.
The preacher came and said death words rooted in dirt older than any of them. People agreed at the right length and with the right face. After, men stood in knots and untied Mr. Rutledge's life into pieces you could hold. A barrel-aged story here, a horse deal there, a joke that used to be sharper than it was now. Eulalie moved through those knots like wind, collecting nothing you could see and all the rest. By night, the house had exhaled enough mourning to let ordinary hunger back in. The doctor left behind a little paper that folded into itself. Inside it, words about accident and caution and condolence coiled with a snake's efficiency. Eulalie saw the paper on a sideboard near the ledgers. She had to pass it to carry a tray. Her hand twitched. She kept walking. In the yard, Isaiah waited as if he'd been growing there all along. He did not step into the light. He lifted an eyebrow so small only a woman watching him with her whole body could see it. Eulalie set the tray down on the stoop and went to him into the dark, where you can hear someone better than you can see them. "It's done," she said. His breath came out as if he'd been holding it across a river. "Are you safe?" "For now," she said. "Mr. Larkins writes accident. The doctor writes accident twice. Crenshaw bleeds his guilt down his arm and doesn't know how to wipe it." "And the boy?" Isaiah asked. "He's a cup too full," she said. "I moved him back, but he'll remember the sound of the barrel more than any sermon." She swallowed. "We got to do something before Crenshaw remembers how to be a man again." "What do you want?" he asked. He always said it that way, like want was a river worth mapping. "I want the reserve to go to Orleans even if it never reaches a buyer," she said, and Isaiah's chuckle was a knife in a sheath. "You want it to stall," he guessed. "I want it to cost," she answered, "and I want Briney gone north before anyone can sell him to pay a debt." Isaiah leaned against the sourwood, bark biting his shoulder through his shirt in a way that would make him remember this moment in the morning. "Barrel?" he asked. "We build him one. A hogshead for sugar, not whiskey, no fume. False head. Breath hole disguised under a hoop, not on top, so a man looking feels only wood. Pack around with apples. Send it as a mistake we will apologize for later." Isaiah let the plan walk around him in the dark. Then he nodded. "I can get him off at Rockport. The ferryman there owes me 2 favors and a muzzle." "2 more people," Eulalie said, because she had learned that a net thrown is wasted if not made wider than the fish you know. "Letty's cousin, her back has a scar that makes men choose her off a block.
they will choose her. And Jonah's sister, she will be sold for the color of her eyes if anyone counts money in a room with her in it. Isaiah drew his mouth into the shape of risk, then let it relax into the shape of yes. 3, he said, no more. Each one doubles the chance of the rope tilling on itself. 3, she agreed. I'll make the head, you meet the boat, and she stopped, because the next sentence had teeth. Crenshaw must be busy the night they roll. Busy? Isaiah's teeth showed like a fox's, not unkind, but honest.
Trouble obliged. The day after the burial, the widow sent for Mr. Crenshaw and spoke to him long behind a door with a key. When he came out, his face had the look of a man who had been given a job too big clapped onto a back too small. He pushed that bigness onto everyone he saw until even the white dog went around him wide. He shouted about the New Orleans shipment and said Friday as if a day could be persuaded or beaten. Eulalie worked with a kind of brightness that did not belong to joy. In the cooper shed, she planed a head that would seem thicker than it was, a secret belly between two skins. She drilled 3 holes, not where a man would think to look, and then choked them with cork whittled from a stopper until they looked like knots. She fitted the head and unfitted it, and then fitted it again until even her hand could not tell work from oak. Bryony watched and kept his questions in his cheek like a piece of candy he meant to save. "Tonight," she said to him, when the sun lay flopped on the ridge like a tired hound, "you sleep 2 hours, then you come when the frogs all lift together. We're quiet." He nodded, and the nod shook. She put her palm against his back like a house post and felt him steady. "You'll go where the river runs north," she said. "You'll not look back until Isaiah says so. You'll breathe when the boat breathes. Hear me?" "I hear," he said, and his voice broke on the rocks of the word. Letty's cousin, Martha, came to the shed as if she had been sent for cloth, and Eulalie took her measure with her eyes the way a seamstress would. Jonah's sister, Anna, appeared with a basket of nothing, and Eulalie tucked the basket into a corner where it became a pillow without anyone finding it strange. 3 lives in a room with wood and tools, and the truth that danger is not a man's property. She wrote a small thing that night, in a hand that did not belong to any person who slept in the quarters. On a scrap from the doctor's condolence, she made a list that looked like inventory. 1 hogshead sugar, apples, tools, cloth. She put the hogshead first and wrote a number that was wrong by 1, as if a tired clerk had miscounted. She slid the scrap into the ledger where a man keeping order would be glad to find any order at all. She set a chalk 13 on the hogshead and chalked the same on the ledge's edge. When a world is built of marks, you learn where to lay them so the world balances. Crenshaw drank like a man who thought the liquid could wash him clean of the parts the deputy's eyes had touched. He slept in the chair by the window in the office, snoring through his mouth so spit made a white penny at the corner. Eulalie stood in the hall and counted breaths until she knew the rhythm a door could ride open without disturbing. When the frogs lifted together, she went to the shed. Bryony was there, a shaking bundle of yes. Martha and Anna were there, small and large in different places, both looking like courage hadn't yet learned what face to wear. Eulalie showed them the belly of the hogshead. She showed them the breath holes. She showed them how apples could be friends. "Once you're in," she said to Bryony, "you do not cough. You think of fish. Fish don't cough. You don't kick. You think of root. Root doesn't kick. You don't pray out loud. God can hear you whisper in your head same as anywhere." He climbed in with the solemnity of a man kneeling to a new name. Martha followed, folding her long legs like ribbon. Anna last, her hands folded on her belly as if holding a bowl steady. Eulalie set apples around them, the scent bright and insisting. She laid the false head with a kiss like a mother lays a bonnet. The hoops bit down to their songs. The hogshead went from open to closed with a sigh that sounded almost like relief.
Jonah came like a shadow that had been practicing for this night all its life. He lifted his end and Eulalie her end, and they rolled the hogshead out of the shed into a world that kept its own counsel. The yard looked like a place held in a prayer you weren't sure you believed. The office window held Mr. Crenshaw's snore. The white dog opened one eye and decided to keep any news it had for later. They pushed and rolled and breathed with the barrel's breath down to the lower road where Isaiah waited with a man who was only a coat and a hat. The river made the night bigger than usual. It had rained upriver, and the water carried that memory like a green scent.
13, Isaiah whispered, touching the chalk as if it were a person. He knocked twice on the head so Bryony would hear the world outside and not make one by himself inside. Eulalie put her ear to a breath hole and heard the small sound of bravery sweating. "Go," she said, and it was both a blessing and a command. Isaiah and the ferryman, coat and hat, took the hogshead into the dark and then into water. Water took it in like a story you would tell a second time because the first telling was too quick. Eulalie watched until the barrel was only a change in the dark, a place where stars didn't sit quite right. Then she turned and rolled the empty ones into a new row so the yard's morning face would not know it had been missing teeth in the night. At dawn, Mr. Crenshaw had a headache that kept him from counting well. He barked at Jonah, barked at Eulalie, barked at a wagon wheel that had less wobble than his logic. He said Friday and meant Thursday and then corrected himself and blamed the sun for being where it was. The ledger, with the scrap inside it, looked so tidy he could have cried with relief if crying had been a thing he could afford. The wagon left for the landing with 12 barrels and 1 hogshead of apples that was not on paper, riding on the quiet knowledge that a tired clerk is a kind of angel, too. Eulalie watched it go with her hands still and her jaw brave. When the dust from its wheels settled, she went into the still house and stood in the old room and listened. No man's breath lived here now. The barrels slept simple again. That evening, Isaiah's sign came the way signs do when words are dangerous. A strip of rawhide tied to the low sycamore, hanging like a tongue. Eulalie took it in her palm and felt the wet of the river still in it. She breathed out hard, and then only a little. Letty saw her and answered with a nod that made her eyes wet at the edges. 3? Letty asked. 3, Eulalie said. North. God keep the apples fresh, Letty said, and smiled like a woman whose laughter had been folded and stored and taken out again, wrinkled, but there. Mr. Larkins returned 2 days later with a paper that had stamped letters on it, letters a man who cannot read still respects. He told Mrs. Rutledge that the accident was an accident and the county would not trouble her for more than the usual trouble. He told Mr. Crenshaw to keep flame from fume and wrote it down as if writing made men behave. He told Eulalie nothing, which is a way men say a woman has done her job well enough to not be noticed. He was halfway to his horse when he turned back, scratching the stubble on his neck. "You were there," he said to Eulalie, not mean, not kind, just curious, like a man looking into water to see his face is the same wherever he stands. "I carried the light," she said. He nodded. "You set it down quick," he said. "Yes," she said. She did not ask him how he knew the difference between quick and slow. He was not the kind of man to answer in any way that would teach her. He tipped his hat a hair and went. That night, Eulalie climbed to the rafters and unwrapped the oiled cloth. She added 3 names to the Bible leaf with the fat, swelling letters that meant a person learned at night. She pressed the char down harder on Bryony's name than on the others, Martha, Anna, not because she loved him more, but because he had been the first barrel to float when the plan left her body for the world. She almost wrote Isaiah and then didn't, because you do not write a river. You let it be itself and hope it remembers the path you begged of it. The next weeks were a braid, work and watching, hunger and small victories. The reserve went to Orleans a day late by the buyer, soured by the delay. A letter came back with hard edges about standards and expectations. Crenshaw carried it like a live coal that burned only him, though he tried to hand it to others. The widow's brother arrived from Lexington with a lawyer's chin and a mind like a drawer with too many keys. He looked at Crenshaw and saw a tool without a handle. He looked at the ledgers and saw a mess trying to dress itself as a system. He asked Eulalie nothing and told her less. But one evening she passed the open door and heard his voice say, "We must trim, we must sell. Debt is a horse on a roof." He meant people. He meant names Eulalie had stored. She went to Letty and to Jonah and to the small circle of women who could swallow a secret and keep it from burping. We set more barrels, not to drown, to carry. We do it one by one until the river knows us by our first names. And while we do, we teach letters fast as beans grow. Teach? Aunt Zora asked, like a bell rung in a small church. You open the shade to others? I can't be the only tree, Eulalie said. They'll cut me for lumber. We make a grove.
So she taught on wash nights with steam for an ally, and on Sunday afternoons when the sun went dull behind cloud. She taught on scraps, the corner of a receipt, the blank side of a whiskey ticket, the inside of a flour sack smoothed with a bottle. She taught with labels and tattered newspapers and a hymn book that had learned too many mouths. She taught with fear sitting beside her like a cat that might claw you any moment and purred anyway. The boy, Thomas, came once, shoes too clean for the floors he walked. He stood in the door of the washroom like another door. Letty saw him first and set a stool in the corner as if she had been expecting a prince. Eulalie did not reach for him. She kept her hand on the word she had just written, bread, and let the steam make the letters a little tender. I saw, he said, not looking at her. He stared at the wall where lye had bitten its way into the wood in white fern patterns. Pa. His mouth worked. He fell. Eulalie breathed once. He leaned in, she said. He forgot where flame belongs. She kept her eyes on the page because boys are braver when not looked at full on. I moved you back. He nodded. His shoulders dropped the tiniest bit, like a bird that realizes a window is glass and not sky. I know, he said. And the word was not an accusation or a blessing. It was something between. He looked at the letter under her hand. Bread, he read, halting. His mother had been teaching him figures. No one had been teaching him letters except the way a town teaches a boy by posting signs that tell him what belongs to other men. Bread, she said. She turned the page. Water. She wrote it. He mouthed it in silence. She turned the page again. Fire. He flinched and then nodded like a small soldier. He left without saying anything that would make trouble for either of them later. Letty took back the stool as if putting a candle out. War rumors grew like mushrooms, fast, pale, and not for eating. Men argued in the lane. Some spoke of Lincoln like a conjure. Some spat into the dirt where his name might have landed. A rider came through with a paper, and Letty's cousin who worked in the kitchen at the big house told how the widow's brother had read it out loud. Fort Sumter, shots, South, North. The words were mouthfuls that tasted like copper. The lawyer's chin cut the air with more certainty than the paper did. He spoke of contracts and supply and how gentlemen would still need drink whatever flag flew over them. Eulalie listened with the same ear she used for the river. War is a sound first in the places people call far. Then it is a smell, then a wagon, then a man without his proper parts. She heard the sound and knew the smell was coming. We have to move faster, she told Isaiah under the sycamore, before men in uniforms come counting, uniforms of any color. Counting men love to count people twice. Isaiah nodded, faster, but smoother. They sent 4 more souls in 2 weeks, 1 in a sugar hogshead, 1 in a flour barrel with a lid Letty had stitched to look like sackcloth, 2 in a crate marked glass, fragile, because men who break things for sport are still careful around their own reflection. Each time, Eulalie's hand on the wood said a different farewell to a different piece of herself. Each time, she climbed to the rafters and wrote their names in fat letters that made room for whole lives, and her cloth bundle swelled.
Crenshaw grew meaner as the lawyer grew more certain. Meanness in a man is like damp in wood. It sneaks in when the day seems fair. He cornered Eulalie behind the rain barrel one afternoon and put his hand on the wall near her head like a man about to tell the truth and not liking the taste. He said, "I don't know what you done, but I smell it. You hear me? I smell something I can't see, and it smells like you." Eulalie looked at his hand on the wall, a pale spider with chewed nails, and then at his face, which had the twitch of a boy who wanted to run and wanted to hit. "You smell whiskey," Eulalie said. "It's all over you." He showed his teeth. It wasn't a smile. "You ain't clever," he said, but the words sounded like someone else's clothes on him. "Mr. Larkins thinks it was me with the lamp, but I know there's more." He leaned in a little, close enough that she could count the red lakes in the whites of his eyes. "You learn in books?" he asked suddenly, the way a dog changes direction in a dream. Eulalie's heart nudged to ribs and then sat down again. "I learn wood," she said. "It's older than any book." She kept her voice so flat that it could have been a tabletop. He laughed and flipped his hand at her face like flicking away a fly. "You ain't clever," he said again, but this time he said it like he was trying to convince himself. He walked away with shoulders that didn't match each other. That night she took the bundle from the rafters and thought about burning it. Every scrap, every name, every number, every breath mark she had put down. She could feel the relief of fire in her bones the way a tired woman can feel sleep before it comes. Then she remembered Bryony's mouth forming north in the dark as the hogshead rocked under his back. She wrapped the bundle tighter, slid it into a new place only she could reach without a ladder, and left it there like a promise. The lawyer trimmed. He tried to sell Letty and found that the kitchen cannot run on a white woman's good opinion of recipes. He tried to sell Jonah and found that the still will punish a fool who thinks copper friendly to strangers. He tried to sell Eulalie and found that men from Louisville came with their checkbooks open when her name was mentioned in the same sentence as Barrels. He delayed, then decided to keep her until a better price could be had. That decision kept her within arm's reach of her own work. Decisions made by men who do not know what women can do are a useful wind.
On a night when the frogs sang like a choir that had lost its director, Isaiah came with news carried in his bones. "Patrols on the river," he said. "Men who never cared what floated yesterday now care. They cut a hogshead at Calhoun and found a man named Daniel who forgot how to be small when the boat bumped. He lived. He is in a cage where he can smell the water he was headed to." The news moved through Eulalie like cold water. "No more barrels for now," she said, mouth numb. "No," Isaiah agreed. "Rafts, cane brakes, feet, and paper." He looked at her with that fox honesty. "You can write. You can point people at places they will be safe, with letters a white man will read without thinking about the hands that wrote them." She did not ask how he knew. She had been careful, but you cannot hide from a man who watches you the way a river does, by your effect on the banks. She nodded. "Paper," she said, tasting the word as if it were the first time. She wrote small maps, the kind that looked like notes about feed and end up being a picture of a bend in the river you can stand at night without being seen. She wrote lists that were actually stories. Button, 3. Needle, 2. Cloth, river color. She wrote a letter that looked like an order for staves and was in fact a time and a place and a hymn number to hum if you were the right person. She used a hand that belonged to nobody. Isaiah carried those papers in his hat and came back with people who had found the bends and the hymns. One last thing remained, heavy as a hoop waiting for its ring. The boy. Thomas had begun to watch her the way a person watches a clock, not unkind, not friendly, simply measuring. On a morning when the light came clean through the sycamores and made coins on the ground, he caught up to her between the cooper's shed and the still house, a place where voices don't go far. "Did you kill my pa?" he asked. He did not blink when he said it. It was not an accusation now. It was a need for a balance to stop swinging. Eulalie could feel the truth in her mouth like a rock. She wanted to spit it or swallow it or throw it. She did none of that. She let it sit on her tongue and taste her. Then she said, "Your pa leaned into the mouth of a barrel and forgot the rule of fire. I put my hand on his wrist. I did not pull him out." He considered that. Children are better at precision than adults. "You could have," he said. "I could have. And there are 8 people sleeping where they choose now because I did not. Maybe more." She did not say the names. Names are a currency you spend only at certain counters. He looked at the still house, at the barrels that looked like patient animals. "He wasn't kind," he said, and the words came out with the surprise of sneezing. "Not to you." He put his chin down like a man signing a paper. "I won't tell what I think I saw, not because of you, but because of what I see now." She bowed her head, not in gratitude to him, but in respect for the piece of himself he had just placed on the ground between them, where both could see it. "Mind him, mother," she said. "Read when you can. Keep flame where it belongs." "I will," he said, and he walked away with a stride that was almost his father's, and then, thank God, wasn't. War came closer like summer lightning that keeps not quite arriving. Men drilled in a field near the road. A flag, blue, showed itself on the far bank one afternoon and then blinked away. Buyers became rarer. Money got thin. Hunger in town turned its face towards the distillery with the interest of a cat. The night Eulalie had been waiting for came not as a sign, but as an absence. The lawyer packed and went east to see about investments. Patrols thinned because a captain decided the river was less important than the road this week. The moon was a small sickle. The frogs were quiet for no reason anyone could name. Eulalie gathered 15 people with nothing louder than a look.
They met at the canebrake, beyond the sourwood, where the river makes a pocket the wind forgets. Isaiah had a flatboat that looked like it had been made by a man who did not want anyone to think a man had made it. Jonah brought a sack of nails and a hammer that had lost a tooth. Letty brought bread and onions and the skin of fat from a ham they had saved like a secret. Aunt Zora brought the names in her head and a song that would not be sung out loud. Eulalie carried staves, 10 of them, good white oak, smooth as a promise. She lashed them with rope in a way she had been practicing in her mind for months, making a raft that could aid the flatboat if the weight begged for more river to carry it. She set the staves on the water and pressed them with her palm. They answered with the deep, forgiving yes of wood that knows its job. Above them, the still house's windows were dark. In one of them, a boy watched with his face a coin and then moved away. Eulalie saw the motion and did not wave. They pushed. The water took them like kin. The far bank was a country, and then an idea, and then a place that could be touched. As they slid, a shape in the dark resolved into the broad flank of the Evangeline, tied up and sleeping between trips. Eulalie felt the current tug and remembered the night she had copied the word Orleans and tasted the longing that came off it like heat. She did not need Orleans now. She needed Ohio and everything above it. Halfway over, a shout went up behind them. 2, maybe 3 men, horses uncertain at the bank. Crenshaw's voice was there, high with the stress of a song he didn't know the words to. "Boat!" he yelled. "Boat!" The patrols might have thinned, but trouble never vanished. It only walked different roads. Isaiah bent to the pole. Jonah put a shoulder to the plank and pressed a miracle out of wood and water. Eulalie crouched by the lashed staves, fingers on the knots she had taught to tell time. "Hold," she whispered to them, and to the people, and to the fear that makes feet clumsy. A shot split the quiet. It found nothing but noise. Another. Splinters jumped from the prow like fish afraid. Letty said hush to someone who had not spoken. Aunt Zora's song moved inside her like a wheel. Then the river's own fortune took a side. An upstream log decided to exist in the path of their pursuers. A horse stumbled with the drama horses bring to all their stumbles. A man cursed in a voice that told the night his father's name and the fact that he never meant to be a riverman. The third shot went wide, like a lie. The quiet held them in its arms again. They slid into the canebrake on the far side, where night keeps things. Hands reached up from darkness, 3 men with hats, 2 women with shawls, friends of Isaiah's, which meant friends of Eulali's now. They pulled the boat into reeds and rubbed mud onto the bright places until the boat became a silence. Feet touched ground, not freedom, but ground that led to it. People did not cry. People breathed and then breathed again, and then turned to the small work that keeps blood in a body. Bread tore, onion bit. A boy, Bryony, stepped out of the cane and put his forehead against Eulali's shoulder for 1 beat, and then stepped back with his mouth set like a man's. "You kept your breath," she said. "I kept it," he said, "and I kept count." He lifted 3 fingers, 3 nights of apples. His grin cut through the dark and made a small holiday no one had planned. Isaiah touched Eulali's elbow, a light knock that meant, "Now you can let your bones believe you are safe for 1 minute." She did. 1 minute. Then she stood straight and looked back at the black seam of the river, and beyond it the darker block of the still house roof, the yard, the sourwood, the house where a boy turned a page and sounded out bread, water, fire. "We go again," she said. Not to rush the joy out of the night, but to give it its proper job. "Again," Isaiah said, "until the river knows us by our middle names." Days gathered. War seeped into every crack in town. Men who owned nothing but bluster put on coats and gave orders like they had bought the air. Patrols moved, policy changed, then changed again. The distillery kept breathing because drink ties itself to grief and victory both. Eulalie stood until she was certain the men in charge would rather keep her than sill her. She taught until she could feel letters growing in the dark like moss. She sent people until the names on her Bible leaf made a grove. The widow and her lawyer brother finally sold the place to a man from Frankfurt who didn't know the river yet. He looked at Eulalie and saw a steady hand. He looked at Crenshaw and saw a headache. He kept one and let the other go. Mr. Crenshaw left with a face like a door that had been slammed by wind. He would find another man to hurt, or another bottle to blame. Eulalie did not wave. On the night before the new man took his chair, Eulalie went down to the old room and stood among the barrels. She placed her palm on the one that had swallowed a man and did not pull it away. Wood remembers. So do women. She did not thank it. She did not curse it. She simply told it with her bones that something larger than a single man's story had rolled through it that night. It would not be known by that one thing, just as she refused to be known only by the push of her hand. She left a small coin of char under the bung, a mark no one would understand but her. Then she walked out into a yard that belonged somewhat to her now, not by law, but by the geometry of what had been done here and what would be done still. At the quarters, Aunt Zora handed her a biscuit and a smile with 3 teeth. "Leader," the old woman said under her breath, "not a crown, not a chain. A simple word, a blessing that smells like work." Eulalie sat on the step with her biscuit and broke it with careful fingers. She could hear the frogs decide to sing after all. She could hear the river lying its long body down for sleep. She could hear in a far place under the bones of her ears the whisper of paper, the sound a letter makes when it is folded correctly to pass from hand to hand in the dark. She looked up. The sky had a scythe of moon and 2 stars near it as witnesses. She thought of the boy in the big house and the words in his mouth. She thought of Bryony counting apples and Isaiah mapping risk and Letty humming to dough. She thought of the wood under her hand that afternoon and the way it had accepted both a man and a plan without asking to be repaid. "Tomorrow," she said to the night, and the night after, and the next. The words were not a boast or a prayer. They were a schedule. Wood would understand. She stood, shook crumbs from her skirt into the dirt, and went to check the knots on the raft she kept behind the cane for the next time somebody needed to move without being seen.